Good afternoon. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is William Hubbard, and I have the privilege of serving as chair of the board of the World Justice Project. And I wish to welcome all of you who are in attendance here today to learn more about our 2014 Rule of Law Index. There's lots of fresh data we'll be sharing with you as the afternoon unfolds. We're very grateful for your taking the time to be here and learn more about our project and to help us expand our knowledge about the rule of law. We have many distinguished guests in the audience. I will not endeavor to call them by name, but we are fortunate to have a number of ambassadors to the United Nations who are with us this afternoon. You're all welcome. We're so delighted you're here. We also have a significant audience participating virtually, and they'll be asking questions. We'll also be passing out cards today for you to complete where you can submit questions for our panelists as the day unfolds. We'll begin today with a brief introduction to the World Justice Project by our distinguished founder and CEO, Bill Newcomb. This will be followed by an overview of the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index by our Executive Director, Juan Botero. Chief Research Officer Alejandro Ponce will provide highlights from the 2014 data. We are honored to welcome this afternoon three distinguished commentators who will give us their thoughts about the use of the index from both international and domestic perspectives. First, we will hear from Brackett Denniston, General Counsel of GE. Following Mr. Denniston, Dr. Margaret Sikwesi, Chair of the Board of Citizens for Justice in Malawi, will provide her thoughts. Finally, former Justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, the Honorable Richard Goldstone, will provide remarks. At the conclusion of the program, we look forward to a robust Q&A session, where, as I indicated, we will take questions from the live audience as well as questions submitted via our virtual audience. You may submit written questions at any time to a WJP staff member, and they're patrolling the aisles as we speak, who will bring your questions to the moderator, WJP board member and former president of the Supreme Federal Court of Brazil, the Honorable Justice Ellen Gracie Norfleet. Bill Newcomb is the founder, visionary, and chief executive officer of the World Justice Project. He is in the Seattle office of the international law firm of K&L Gates. From 1978 to 2002, Mr. Newcomb served as the lead lawyer for Microsoft Corporation. He is a past president of the American Bar Association and is trustee emeritus of Dartmouth College, where he was chairman of the board from 2004 to 2007. Mr. Newcomb is chair of the Dean's Advisory Council at the Stanford Law School and as adjunct professor, teaches a spring semester seminar on the rule of law. Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, William, for that warm welcome and generous introduction. Let me add my welcome to those of you who are here in the room with us and those of you who are following us on the internet. It's gratifying to see this sort of turnout of a live audience and to know how many folks are following us on our live feed. It is my responsibility to give you just a sense of what the World Justice Project is, to provide some context for the more expert discussion that will follow from Juan Botero and Alejandro Ponce. We are a 7-year-old enterprise. We can no longer avail ourselves of the excuse of being a startup. We're a toddler. We've made some mistakes and we've had some success, but it all starts from two premises that guide all of our thinking and our work. And the first premise is just this, that the rule of law is foundationally important, not fundamentally important, but foundationally important in the sense that it is that essential foundation for functional communities. And we think of functional communities in terms of communities that provide opportunity for work and for meaningful work, and also opportunities to improve one's life. And we also think of these as communities of equity, which means some sort of equitable relationship between the government and its citizens and residents, and equitable relationships between individuals and private institutions. Essentially, without the rule of law, we don't believe, and we think the evidence is abundant and clear, that you can't expect to have sustainable development, whether it's economic, political, or human development. And we believe that accountability is essential for the rule of law. We think of the notion of the rule of law in terms of 4 universal principles. I underscore the word universal because it is our attempt to put some meaning into the term which rises above partisanship and rises above, if you will, forms of government or even forms of economic systems. And so we start with, of the first of the 4, it is this notion of accountability. And our belief is that the government and its officers and officials, as well as private entities and individuals, should all be held accountable under the law. The second principle then treats the law. Not just any law can be the basis for accountability, but the laws have to be, at a minimum, clear so folks can understand them who are not trained in the law. They have to be publicized, pushed out into the public marketplace of ideas. They have to be stable, reasonably stable. They can be made better, but they need to be stable so folks can make plans and rely on them in terms of their work and in terms of their personal life. And they have to be applied evenly to all folks who are a part of the system. And finally, they have to protect fundamental rights. And by that we mean at least to recognize property rights, to have protection of the individual, and a core of human rights, at least expression, religion, and assembly. The third of the universal principles is this, that the processes by which those laws, rules, regulations are enacted in the first instance, the legislative process, the process by which they are administered, all of that vast bureaucracy where most people have contact with the legal system in their community, and enforced by police, military, and courts. Those processes all have to be accessible, and they have to be fair, and they have to be reasonably efficient. And finally, there's justice, there's dispute resolution. Again, whatever form of government we may be talking about, justice has to be delivered timely, and it's got to be done by competent, ethical, and very importantly, independent representatives and neutrals who are of sufficient number, who have adequate resources to do their job and to do it right, and who reflect the makeup of the communities that they serve in that capacity. The trailing premise for our work is just this, that multidisciplinary collaboration is by far the most effective way to advance the rule of law around the world. When you think about it, it can't be thought of in terms of rule of lawyers and judges. We are all stakeholders, whether we are in business, whether we are faith leaders, whether we are in health or education, the arts, architecture and engineering, law enforcement, peacekeeping. Everyone needs a foundation of the rule of law to accomplish what we hope to. And so it is that multi-stakeholder approach that is fundamentally important to us in terms of garnering the kind of support and the kind of force that we need to bring the rule of law more broadly around the world. Our project has a simple mission. Rule of law is not something you can export or import. We believe that the rule of law has got to be more than a set of laws and systems and personalities, that it has to be a homegrown culture. And the way that's most likely to manifest itself is if there are more people who understand the meaning of the rule of law, its foundational importance, and have confidence in the way we measure adherence or failure of adherence to the rule of law. Government reform, whether directly by the government or in response to petitions from businesses or civil society or the academy, is a very important goal of ours. And finally, the incubation of hundreds and hundreds of practical, on-the-ground programs that in some meaningful way advance the rule of law in that home community. We have 3 lines of business, from left to right, if you will: research and scholarship, engagement, and the Rule of Law Index, which is what brings us here today. And these are, we believe, in self-informing and self-reinforcing lines of business, as those arrows were meant to display for you. Research and scholarship is in 2 rounds. Now, 5 years ago, we were able to get the contributions from 2 Nobel laureates and other folks of that quality to write a couple of books made up of papers about the rule of law and why it is important. And the second round has just begun last year. We have, in our own audacious way, taken it upon ourselves to form a consortium of rule of law scholars. We now have a roster of 50 of those scholars who are working with Alejandro Ponce, our director of research. And the simple notion is that it's past time for the academy all around the world to recognize that the rule of law deserves to be treated as a discrete and as a legitimate subject. It's not enough for University X to say we do a little bit of that over in political science, and the other university to say we do a little bit of that in our law school. It deserves much more focus and much more brain power. And these 50 leading scholars, all of whom have some background and expertise and a commitment to the rule of law, will be communicating and collaborating in a way to elevate the rule of law as a very important subject in the academy worldwide. They are meeting for the first instance at the University of Chicago in October of this year. Engagement is our second line of business. It has just 3 parts, as this slide shows. The first is the building and nurturing of a virtual network. We now believe that there are over 10,000 people who have had contact with us and who are a part of this movement that we are trying to stimulate for more rule of law. And as you know, networks can lead in lots of different directions towards concrete action increasingly. We are also the convener of strategic meetings. Every other year we have our global forum. Some of you have been with us at a global forum. We also have regional meetings. And we have, just as of the last year and a half, begun single country sorties, where we're invited into a country where the time is right for that country in a sort of interim phase to provide our data to help that country move its government towards a rule of law regime. And thirdly, we have the program incubation I mentioned earlier. A little more about incubation. We find ways through our website and our library of programs and at these meetings to encourage people to bring ideas for some practical on-the-ground program, to develop that idea, to turn it into a business plan, a strategic plan, and then execute on that program. We have a bit of money which we can provide to them in grants for seed money, and it is amazing to us how far $2,500 or $5,000 in seed money can go for a project of the sort that you see illustrated here. Anti-corruption in construction, engineers and architects get it. They understand that the rule of law is fundamentally important to them. Justice for women was the translation of women's rights laws in Sierra Leone so that women in the countryside understood for the first time that they had rights that were on the books in a language they didn't understand. Doing business in Iraq Guide, a way to do business in a forthright and non-corrupt fashion. Environmental law performance assessments in conjunction with the Law of Nature group, and bribery reporting in India by the bribe hackers, a group of young activists in the best sense who are trying to root out bribery in India. The Rule of Law Index is what brings us here today, and we'll be talking about that at some length. Just by way of introducing the concept, it is, as some of you know already, an annual assessment tool which measures adherence to the rule of law, this year in 99 different countries. It's all fresh data, it's original data, and it's based upon 100,000 household surveys and almost 2,500 surveys of experts. The content and the methodology by which we build the content has been juried all over the world, and it's found to be scientifically valid. It is not data which will stun or surprise very many people. That's not the point. The point is, for the first time, we believe, in a very comprehensive scale, we are able to produce data upon which public and private institutions can rely in making serious decisions about where to move their communities. With that, I would like to introduce Juan Botero. Juan is going to come up now on cue, we hope. Is our executive director. Before Juan became our executive director a couple of years ago, he was the director of our index. This index has three architects, if you will. Mark Agrast, who's here in the audience somewhere. Mark, raise your hand so we can acknowledge you. Alejandro Ponce, who you hear from shortly, and Juan Botero together built this thing. And Juan comes to us from both an academic and a government and a social science background. He spent a number of years at the World Bank working on the Doing Business Index. He's been a representative of and a lawyer for the government of Colombia in trade matters and other things. And he has written and taught at a number of institutions, mostly in the Western Hemisphere. Juan.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, everybody, for your presence here. It's greatly appreciated. The Rule of Law Index is...
We have videos.
Yeah.
I apologize. There's an even better way to introduce Juan Botero, and that is to share with you some video-taped testimonials from a cross-section of folks who want to talk about why the Rule of Law Index is useful to them. I apologize for being out of order. If we can roll that video, please.
All societies need to be based on the solid foundations of adherence to the rule of law. No community can function well outside the context of the rule of law. In its absence, there is no order, only anarchy. There is no justice, only unfairness and oppression. There is no progress, only decline and decay.
The rule of law is not just an abstract concept, it's not just an abstract principle, but it's something that actually affects the lives of women, men, and children.
Because without having judicial reforms and rule of law, we will never have a stable economic development, fair and well-functioning civil society. It is obvious that strengthening the rule of law is essential to every member of society who wants justice, economic and social progress.
It is very important for me that we continue to have measurement and the definition of the rule of law and how it is adhered to. And that when we do that, we should use internationally accepted norms and standards. I say so because in my view, the universality of the rule of law cannot be overemphasized. In the developing world, we generally have a political leadership that always looks at the rule of law as a foreign imposition from the West without regard to the fact that the rule of law is in fact probably even more important for the developing world. It is the developing world that needs, for instance, foreign direct investment, which would improve the lives of your ordinary person in the street. And foreign direct investment is directly related to the observance of the rule of law.
Determining how to improve rule of law is one of the really big problems in the world today. Until the World Justice Project, there wasn't a good universal definition of rule of law, and there weren't any studies that measured it across the globe in a concrete way. And what WJP has done is come up, first of all, with a very useful definition of rule of law that looks at it across a bunch of different dimensions. And second, has gone out and gathered on-the-ground data from a large number of countries to come up with this rule of law index.
If you want to improve the rule of law, you need a way to measure it. The World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index helps the global community by doing just that. It offers independent, comprehensive data that can be used to drive policy, set benchmarks, and guide successful program development.
The World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index helps enormously not only to the public officials, political leaders and chief justices, but mainly to the ordinary citizens from all over the world.
The World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index is a useful tool. It takes a very complicated but important concept or topic, the rule of law, and breaks it down in a rigorous but accessible way. There are a number of things I like about it. One is that it combines expert opinion with public opinion, which is unusual. Most indexes, it's a choice of one or the other. It covers many countries, almost 100 countries and maybe more soon, and it covers both the United States as well as countries on the developing world side. So it's not a one-sided index that's only looking at some parts of the world. It's useful for research, and I also use it sometimes when I'm preparing to go to a country and want to get a quick overview of the rule of law situation, because it covers so many different facets of the legal institutions and the functioning of those institutions in a country that it's a good backgrounder when you need to get up to speed quickly on a particular country. So it's general, it's specific, it's rigorous but accessible. It's an unusual project to take such a complicated concept and make a useful index that's good for practitioners and scholars alike.
We've seen these index scores and rankings cited by everyone, from heads of state to journalists to citizens all around the world. It's helping transform the global conversation about the rule of law, and in doing so, providing a new source of knowledge that can improve lives everywhere.
It's a great pleasure for me to introduce the 2014 Rule of Law Index. This is a powerful tool. It's a tool that can take the deficits and the needs of a particular justice system off the dusty pages of legal text and put them into reality. It's a tool that can bridge the gap between what we think we need and tell us how we can actually achieve it.
The struggle to truly establish the rule of law is a long and often a very difficult one. It is indeed a never-ending journey, as no nation can claim to have attained it fully. Any community that embarks on that journey will require guidance. It will require signposts along the way, marking the distance covered, the stations reached, the challenges that remain, and a roadmap of the remaining part of the journey. The Rule of Law Index provides that guidance in an objective manner as a universal standard for self-evaluation and assessment, and as a compass for steering our nations forward in the march for social, political, and economic justice and advancement. In the hands of individuals and of state institutions, the index provides the means for ensuring that we all become servants of the law, and that in that way we all thus become truly free men and free women in a fair and prosperous society. I thank you very much.
Now welcome Juan Botero.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you again, all of you. The index is a tool who measures how the rule of law is experienced in everyday life around the world. We measure it through 9 factors or dimensions of the concept. If you will, the 4 dimensions in the left refer to restraints on the government, and the 4 dimensions in the right, in the 5 in the right, refer to responsibilities of the government. All of these dimensions must be adhered to in order to have a rule of law society. The first is constraint on the government power. This is the checks and balances. The second one is control of corruption. The third one is open government. Fourth is protection of fundamental rights. Fifth is order and security. Sixth is regulatory enforcement. Then comes civil justice, criminal justice, and informal justice. These dimensions derive from the universal definition of the rule of law that Bill presented earlier. These 9 dimensions are disaggregated into 47 indicators, of which 3 are not comparable across countries for informal justice. The other 44 are used to compare countries across them. Let me just give you a couple of examples of what type of detail we get in each one of these 9. Order and security, we measure crime rates, from burglary to assault to murder. Second, we assess civil conflict, terrorism. And third, the use of violence to redress personal grievances. This includes from mob justice to a situation in which a group of citizens have to barricade the road to get attention from the government. This happens all over the world. Second example, factor 8, criminal justice. We measure the effectiveness of the investigation system, the effectiveness and timeliness of the adjudication of cases, the effectiveness of the criminal correctional system, the impartiality of the entire system, the presence of corruption, the presence of improper government influence, so there's judicial independence, and due process of law and rights of the accused. Now, these 44 indicators further disaggregate from 500 questions. So just to give you an example, for order and security, we use 19 questions items to produce these 3 sub-factors or indicators. And in the case of criminal justice, we use 99 question items to produce these 7 factors, sub-factors or indicators. So this is what we measure. Let's turn now to how we measure it. First, we measure outcomes, not inputs. So we do not count how many police officers are in the streets or how much resources the courts have. We measure whether the citizens are experiencing safety and are receiving access to justice timely and effectively. In order to do that, there is a number of ways in which this exercise could have been done. You could go to administrative data, you could go to statistics. We do not use any of those sources. We rely on the triangulation of 2 sources that are independently collected, all based on new data. The first is a global household survey with a probability sample of 1,000 respondents per country in the 3 largest cities. This gives a total of 100,000 ordinary citizens being interviewed for this exercise. Secondly, we rely on expert questionnaires of 2,400 experts in the areas of civil and commercial law, criminal justice, labor law, and public health. These are local experts assessing the situation of the rule of law in practice in their own countries, not speaking about other countries. Then there's a stage of cross-checking and validation of the data, which includes a statistical audit of the European Commission's Joint Research Center. Very importantly, we measure the rule of law in practice as it is experienced by people in the streets of India, of Mumbai or Venezuela in Caracas, not the law on the books. We measure how the rule of law is evolving in the countries, not why. So this is an important limitation. We do not measure causation. We do not know if the results on the rule of law index respond to the financial crisis or if they respond to the this or that event in the news. What we measure is that every country, every year, is assessed with exactly the same methodology based on questions to the population and to experts. This has been an effort of 8 years of development. This is the 4th report that we produce. It's the 2nd time that we have global sample of 99 countries, and it's the first time in which dynamic measurement is introduced. So it's not just a picture on time, but also it begins to become a movie in which you can see progress across time. However, I need to warn you against reading too much on those dynamic measurements, because this type of institutional variables, things that's fundamental as access to justice, do not change in a few months or in a year. So it is important, as we continue forward, to watch for trends more than see how one country move in the ranking in one variable from one year to the next. This picture is one of these 100,000 people that actually answer the survey in the streets of a middle-income country city. In summary, it's 500 questions, 100,000 households, 2,400 experts interviewed in 99 countries. Now, how do we present the data? Let me walk you very quickly through the country profiles that you will see in your books and which are also available in the webpage. The report is downloadable and all the data is accessible. The country profile has fundamentally three parts. Here at the top, at the top of the profile, we see the country, the cities where the survey was conducted, and this first spider graph web, it shows the peaks and the valleys. A peak is performance is positive. This shows that in some areas, countries are doing better, in others are doing worse. And it also provides a comparison, in this case is South Africa, comparing with Sub-Saharan Africa and with upper middle income countries. The second part is this overall score, the global rank, the regional rank, and the 8 factors that we use to compare countries across the globe with the score, the global rank, the regional rank, and the income group rank. So comparing the country in context, we are not making a comparison between Sweden and Sierra Leone. We're comparing Sweden with Europe and Sierra Leone with Sub-Saharan Africa and low-income countries. And in this case, the factor trend are changes across time. Second part is each one of these 44 indicators is disaggregated and presented with the comparative data from region and income peers. So a bigger bar, in this case, for instance, in the case of Brazil, in judicial independence is higher than in the efficiency of the court system, just to give you an example. And with this, I would like to turn your attention to the results. And for that, I introduce my colleague, Alejandro Ponce. Dr. Ponce is a PhD in economics from Stanford and the chief research officer of this organization. He's been an academic at Yale University and the World Bank and has conducted research and published articles in behavioral economics, financial inclusions, justice indicators, and other subjects. Alejandro?
Thank you, Juan, and thank you very much for being here today. I think what is most interesting of this exercise is to learn just what all these people tell us, right? We went and did this exercise of interviewing 100,000 people. What did they tell us? And just trying to put that together is a complicated exercise. Just the way that we have done it is just to try to come up with aggregating indicators and showing how a country measured in these different dimensions that Juan just talked about is performing. Just what are the strengths and weaknesses of the country? What are the areas where the country needs to improve? On top of that, we did this exercise in 100 countries. So then we also have the advantage of being able to compare just the performance of one country versus the other in many different dimensions. Just going from these country profiles all the way to the top, an interesting question is, okay, so if we did this exercise of interviewing all these people, can we learn something about what's the status of the rule of law in the world? Just what are the global trends that we observe? Just when we look at the entire world, at 99 countries overall. And this is what I'm going to show you at the beginning, just as a parenthesis to the strength of the data which lies in the country profiles. When we do the exercise of actually coming up with an aggregated score, just I'm plotting that in a map, this is what we get. What we have here is just a map just of the score where lighter tones signify higher adherence to the rule of law, just darker tones, lower adherence to the rule of law. I think this is useful just as a visual tool, just to show the status of the rule of law in the world. It's useful if we want to correlate it perhaps with something else. If we just show it, actually, there are differences, obviously, between countries. There is a lot of variation. A lot of them are associated with economic development, but not all of them. We have some countries that even within their income level just are remarkable for the high levels of the rule of law that have achieved, or just for some deteriorations that we have observed. But this map that we showed here, just for the overall scores, we can replicate that for each one of the 44 indicators that we produced. Indeed, in your book, there are some maps showing just some of the factors that comprise this overall rule of law score. So if you're not interested necessarily on the entire rule of law, but if you're only interested in the criminal justice system, you can actually look at the map and see just how the countries perform. And perhaps the image is a little bit different than the one when we look at an aggregated score. So let me just go now just a little bit beyond just having an aggregate map and looking at each one of the regions that we have. And I'm just going to pick an example. Just we have the summaries of each one of the regions are in your book and on the webpage, and they are online. So let's walk a little bit through Latin America, just understanding obviously that just trying to summarize a region is difficult because there are disparities between countries. In the same continent, we have Uruguay and Venezuela, so which perform a little bit different. But if we just do the exercise of looking at Latin America overall, we see three things. So the first one is strengths. Latin America, just as compared to other regions or other other regions in the world where developing countries are, just Latin America stands out for fundamental rights and an open government, just access to information, just ability to petition the government, free speech, freedom of association. Again, just there are some particular differences between certain countries, but overall this is something that we observe. What is in parentheses is the ranking of the region, or the average ranking of the countries in the region. The weaknesses, however, is in Latin America, we observe some of the highest crime rates in the world. Just when we compare it to other countries in the Middle East, for example, or in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, just the crime rates in Latin America, just from homicide, burglaries, armed robberies, extortion, are much higher than in other countries. Finally, just taking advantage that we are covering for the first time a large sample of countries, we can talk a little bit about changes between one year and another. As Juan was saying, perhaps it's a little bit premature to talk about trends, but we can talk about changes. And something that we observe, for example, is that criminal justice, or the performance of the criminal justice system, has declined a little bit in a large part of the countries in Latin America. Just extending this idea of the global trends, if we just think about how the countries are performing, we can just see that just first, the second point, 28 countries saw no change, 25 countries only improved in one or several areas, 26 countries saw a deterioration in one or several areas, and 18 countries saw just an improvement in one area but a deterioration in another one. Just again, just global trends, an interesting one, just a couple of trends, order and security improving. This is mainly driven, just talking about the global trend, we're talking about 20 countries that actually saw a significant improvement in order and security. Just to say that it's significant, just stressing that we did a statistical exercise. We don't want to emphasize changes that actually perhaps are not either significant or meaningful for countries. So we did a statistical exercise to really assess which ones stand out as statistically significant. Order and security is a trend just not necessarily related to crime, but related mainly to a deterioration in civil conflict and a decline in violence to redress grievances in a few countries. So violence refers, as Juan was saying, mob justice, or just barricading the road just as a way to pressure the government, or these kind of things. Another one that it's interesting, what I just mentioned before, that it's more notable in Latin America, criminal justice is declining worldwide. We're talking about 25 countries perhaps that saw a decline, even though the reasons are vary just from country to country. In the majority of countries, it's just a perception or a decline in the perception that the police is actually doing a good job in investigating crimes. So with that, let me just go over, stop just talking about these global trends and go to visualizing the data on the web. And I'm struggling a little bit with the mouse here. Okay, so this is, if you click on this webpage, data.worldjusticeproject.org, this is live. So this is what you will see. This is a map like the one that I showed before, just that summarizes the rule of law, but you can actually click in each one of the countries, look at the spider web on the right. There are maps as well for each one of the different factors so that you can explore each one of the different dimensions. So I'm just going to pick one here, which is Indonesia, and trying to go a little bit on what are the strengths and weaknesses of the country. So first we have the spider web, which is a way to summarize the entire profile of the country. Just each one of the sub-factors, the strengths and weaknesses. On the table of the right, we see the overall score first, as well as the global ranking and the regional ranking, just when we take just the overall picture of the rule of law. And then in the table below, we see just the scores, the global rankings and the regional rankings, as well as the income group rankings of each one of the factors that we have. In the case of Indonesia, for example, we have Indonesia's performing relatively well in open government and in constraints on government power, and is scoring relatively low, just if we see it even just within the region or within peers, in absence of corruption. If we want a little bit more detail, we can go to the numbers below and see why, for example, just constraints on government power, well, it speaks about limits by the legislator and an independent judiciary, as well as non-governmental checks, which we understand as a free press and so on. Same thing when we go to open government, just on the bottom left, we can see just right to participation. Just Indonesia scores a little bit higher than other middle-income countries or the countries in the Eastern Asia-Pacific region. Just corruption, for example, is an issue. Just that we can see corruption in the legislature particularly, it's an issue. Finally, we can also see a little bit of trends. So Indonesia, even though just has a problem with corruption, it has had a little bit of improvement over the last year. Just that's why we have the arrow. So just understanding change is important, just to see it in the context of the country. So this is what I just mentioned. If we just click on the webpage, we just want to see just very, very briefly how the countries all the countries in the Eastern Asia-Pacific region are doing. We can see where Indonesia ranks, just as compared to other countries, and so on. Just before going afterwards, just I would like to thank you and thank all the team that really made this happen. Just Joel, Christine, Kelly, Josh, Matt, Dan, Aisada, Karina, and Lori, and Steven, and Sarah, who really made this work possible. Thanks.
Greetings. My name is Monty Makanya. I'm from South Africa, and I'm on the board of the WJP. And we've come to the point now where we discuss the multidisciplinary approach to the rule of law. And I would like to call the panelists to come to the podium, to the stage, rather. If you could please come up, and so I may introduce you. As William pointed out earlier on our esteemed panel, on our esteemed panel, we've got Brackett Denniston, who will be speaking from the business perspective, and we've got Margaret Sikwese, who will be speaking from the civil society perspective, and Justice Goldstone, who will be speaking from the judicial perspective. But before I proceed, I must just inform you of something that took place yesterday before I left South Africa. I received an email from Juan Botero, who has just been here. He sent me an email in Spanish, in which I could not translate because my Google Translate Spanish doesn't translate into Zulu, so it was a bit of a problem. So I could not really act on what he had sent me. And when I eventually got here and I asked him what he had said in that particular email, he told me that he was asking me to bring Johannesburg weather to New York. But alas, it was too late. So if this continues, you have one to blame. As has been pointed out by Bill and others, the approach of WJP to the rule of law has been, to the entrenchment of rule of law, is a multidisciplinary one, in which we say that it is not just the responsibility of one sector of society, whoever it may be, to ensure that the rule of law is adhered to and entrenched. It is every sector of society that is responsible for it. And which is why in our global community, we've got everybody from artists to engineers to politicians, to lawyers, to sports stars. And we ensured, in order to ensure that everybody is contributing to the building of the rule of law in every country. This is why today we have people from 3 sectors which are very critical to the entrenchment of the rule of law and the promotion of the culture of the rule of law. Our first commentator is somebody who comes from the business sector. Brackett Denniston is Senior Vice President, Secretary, and General Counsel for General Electric Company, and he serves on various governance bodies in that corporation. He has also worked in various capacities, both in the public sector and in the private sector and in the legal profession, including as chief of the major fraud unit of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and has advised government in various arms of the state. So I'd like to call on Brackett to come and speak, please.
Thank you very much, Madeleine. First of all, good afternoon to all of you who are joined us today and all of you who are viewing this over the internet. Thanks to the World Justice Project for inviting me to speak. And more importantly, thanks to the WJP, and congratulations. I need to keep this way. Yeah, and congratulations for publishing the 4th edition of the Rule of Law Index. I can say without any hesitation at all that it keeps getting better and better, and is really pretty close to state of the art. I think you saw in the presentations which preceded our panel some of the improvements. I particularly like the comparison year over year. I'd like to see that expanded because I think that's very illuminating, and I of course love the agility of the greater access to the analytics that technology affords us. But I think the most important thing is that year-over-year change, and that will be more important in the future. So we, GE, have been proud to be part of this undertaking from its inception, and proud to be at this event at the announcement of the index the last 2 times it was announced. We love this project. At times, we're a critic, as those who participate, as Juan and Bill know. We've pushed for certain things that we like, and we've had a great dialogue, and we've watched the process by which the whole index has come forward with great intelligence and great care. So why is it important to somebody in the business sector? And I'm going to digress for a moment and talk about 2 vignettes that I think illustrate it. One comes from the testimony of a former chairman of the Federal Reserve Board in the United States. And he was testifying before Congress, and he was asked, to what do you attribute the progress, such as it is, that the American economy continues to make, the growth in the American economy? And he replied, well, you will think this a very strange answer coming from an economist and a central banker, but it is the U.S. Constitution. And by that, he meant the rule of law. So some months after I saw this, I was speaking with Bill Newcomb and his successor, Brad Smith, who's the general counsel of Microsoft. And I mentioned this, and they both told me that they'd been at a Gates Foundation event shortly before we were meeting, and they watched a Q&A with Bill Gates, who you saw in the video at the beginning, and Mr. Gates was asked what did he think would be the most powerful force to the eradication of poverty, which of course is a central mission of the Gates Foundation, and he replied, the rule of law. And what's good for advancing economies, which both those gentlemen, I think, accurately portrayed, is good for a business like GE and good for all the people that work for it. A World Bank study, and they have a similar index, Juan has a background in that, not the same, looked at the growth of the companies or of the countries in that index, and the top quartile had a 2% growth advantage. That's an enormous advantage over those in the bottom quartile. Other economic studies have shown dramatic per capita income effects, as much as 300% for modest improvements in country governance. Country governance and the rule of law matter for growth. Now, it is, of course, as others have said before me today, about better and fairer societies and a better way of life. But good rule of law is also essential to economic progress, and we see it every day in the streets of Venezuela, in Tahrir Square, in Kiev, and in lots of other places in the world, and that's good for GE and all companies and all employees. Why else will we be interested? We do business in 150 countries. 60% of our revenue comes from outside the United States. How those countries are governed and how they apply the rule of law matter hugely to us. We will sell more gas turbines made in South Carolina, in Algeria this year than we will sell in the United States. And I can say that about lots of other product lines. We have sizable businesses in many of the lowest rated countries in the index that we are announcing today, in places like Nigeria, where we have nearly $1 billion in revenue, and in Venezuela, which placed 99th in this index. We'd like to see it a lot better because they are hard places to do business. When we have rule of law, we invest more, we export more, we employ more, and our employees live better lives, as do those societies. By contrast, a weak rule of law is a pernicious barrier to trade and growth and to people everywhere. It is a poverty inducer So what I love about the Rule of Law Index is that it encourages improvement. It encourages great reformers, like the Chief Justice of Nigeria, or of Kenya, I should say, the Chief Justice of Kenya, who I met about 2 years ago, who has done a remarkable job of improving the courts of Kenya. Things like the rule of law help him do his reforming. So it is a vital tool to progress, to economic progress, and progress in way of life. But let me add one other, I think, disturbing note, which was summarized in the presentations that you just saw. What I think we see in this year's report is a lack of progress. Of the 8 factors measured, 4 improved, to be sure, but 4 got worse. And we can't afford to stand still. Sure, there was lots of progress. I looked at, for example, the progress of Korea, which is remarkable. Progress in Russia, while still rated 80th, to be encouraged. But standing still is not good enough. As Bill said when he closed, we all have more work to do to create a freer, better societies, not just for companies like GE, but for the people of those countries. And we stand ready with the WJP to continue that journey. So thanks for having me, and I'm proud to cede my position to my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Brackett. And thanks for telling us why the rule of law is the business of business. I think it's a very important perspective. Our next panelist is somebody who comes from Malawi, Margaret Sikwese. A few of us, just a little short journey. A few of us were in Malawi at the beginning of last year, a few of us from the WJP. Now, Malawi, just about 2 decades back, was run by a dictator. It was a dictatorship run by somebody who had declared himself president for life. And there was no prospect at any point in the future that Malawi would ever be a democracy. And Malawi has been traveling a path towards becoming a democracy for the past 20-odd years. And it has had some failed boulders on the road, and there have been some failed experimentations with democracy, and it's been the subject of great frustration among many Malawians. But what we found when we got there last year was that there's a new energy in Malawi about making sure that Malawi becomes a genuine democracy and that the rule of law is adhered to, and that enthusiasm and energy was very evident from government, from the president down to the ordinary person in the street, to the activists, to the judiciary, to lawyers, to people, to business. And I think Malawi can really be a great experiment and a great laboratory for the adherence to the rule of law, not only in Africa, but in countries at a similar stage of development as Malawi. Now, our panelist is the chair of an organization that is making a lot of that difference, an organization called Citizens for Justice. And she has served on that board, and she's now chair. And she's overseen the restructuring of that organization and making sure that it does great lobbying on behalf, basically on issues of governance, and a lot of advocacy as well, ensuring that there are checks and balances in the governance of Malawi. She's also a senior management development consultant at the Malawi Institute of Management. And she's done a lot of training of private sector and public sector officials to ensure that people understand what they're doing and that the state actually is a capable state and that the business sector is a capable business sector, and that the country is well run and people understand what exactly their jobs are. And it is something that is very essential to the maintenance of the rule of law. Margaret?
Thank you. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pleasure that I am here before you this afternoon at this occasion, launching the 2014 World Justice Project Rule of Law Index. Firstly, I would like to express my profound thanks to the whole World Justice Project team for inviting me all the way from Malawi to speak at this event. I am here representing a non-governmental organization called Citizens for Justice, as well as representing my country, Malawi. Citizens for Justice works on issues of governance, as you have already heard. We are looking at social, economic, and environmental governance. And Citizens for Justice recognizes the big role and appreciates what the World Justice Project is doing in as far as the rule of law is concerned, compiling and publishing this very huge set of data into an accessible index. We believe that it is only through good governance that most countries can meaningfully develop. I say meaningfully develop because development is only meaningful if the citizens of the country can feel it and experience it in a positive way. I believe that development that is not positively experienced by its citizens or any other sections of society in a country is worthless. Good governance, which is observance of the rule of law, and it is also an important aspect of the rule of law, ensures that national development is meaningful, even to the lower levels of society, that is the citizens, not just the elite who hold power. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my remarks this afternoon are centered on 3 points. Firstly, on the rule of law index itself. Secondly, on my organization and the country's experience with using the index. And then lastly, on the challenges that need to be overcome in order for the index to contribute to meaningful national development, especially for developing countries like where I come from. On the rule of law index, the first time I heard about the index was last year when the World Justice Project came on one of its country sorties to launch the 2013 Malawi Rule of Law Index. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a very good person with figures, but the presentation that the WJP has taken in terms of presenting the index in the spiderweb format, I find that it makes it very accessible even to a lay person like myself. The comprehensive consideration of factors that contribute to the index and the simple explanations attached to it make it easily understandable. I also consider the index as an instrument that does not aim at pointing fingers at who is not doing well. Rather, it assists a nation to engage itself in the process of self-reflection at what areas as a country they are not doing well and what can be done about those areas in order to improve. It also points to the areas that our country is doing well and, as a nation, reflect on what should be done to avoid slip-ups. In terms of our experience in using the index, as I already said, that 2013 launch in Malawi was held in Lilongwe, and we invited Her Excellency, the State President, Dr. Joyce Banda, to grace the occasion. And on that occasion, she said to our organization, I invite you to be open with me so that whenever we are not doing well, you should point it out to us. And when we are doing well, you should also point it out to us. I feel that indeed the buck stops with the president, but there is need for a citizenry to send the right signals to those in power so that they can respond accordingly. I find that this opportunity raised by the 2014 index creates a platform for our organization to hold a discussion with those in power as well as all other stakeholders, on what we can do as far as the rule of law is concerned in the country. So it provides us with the opportunity to call on her and say, Madam, here we are. These are the figures this year. What can we do about it? During the same launch, we also held a workshop where there were so many stakeholders, various stakeholders representing various sections of the society, and they reflected on what the index meant to our country. We held group discussions and then a plenary session where we prioritized the list of actions that we thought should be addressed based on what the rule of index was saying for our country. Later on, we went into government offices and various offices targeting those people that we thought were key in propelling the agenda that the index had shown. Indeed, there was excitement. We were well received in the offices, but to our disappointment this year, we seem not to have anything to point at to say, okay, this is what came out of the discussions that we had. Ladies and gentlemen, in short, our experience with the index so far is that it raises pertinent issues that can easily be communicated to various stakeholders. It also provides a legitimate platform for engaging those in authority in an objective manner on issues of national importance. Thirdly, I turn to look at our challenges. As I said, we were very excited when we launched the 2013 index. And right now we are feeling like, oh, we haven't done much really. And looking at the index this year, it's showing that Malawi, most of the indices haven't changed. There is an improvement in one on fundamental rights. We wanted to influence policy, but in order to influence policy, there is a need for sustained lobbying and advocacy by many stakeholders, including the media. As an organization, Citizens for Justice can only lobby and advocate, and we hope that others will also play their part in ensuring that the issues are kept alive. For example, the media can play a big role in putting up the issues for fruitful discussions and informing the political discourse in the country. If everyone takes interest in the index, they should find their niche in terms of what role that they can play in order to ensure good governance. The 2013 index for Malawi raised various issues, including issues of limiting presidential powers and access to information. But because there was no sustained discussion, we have found ourselves dealing with single events instead of long-term strategic issues that would have helped us address some of these events if we had pushed for the right legislation and frameworks. And yesterday, in my discussion with Bill Newcomb, the founder and CEO of WJP, he pointed to the fact that observance of the rule of law is a journey, and indeed, I agree with him. It is a journey that my country and my organization has embarked on. This year, we are going to reflect on what measures we can employ to ensure that we do not remain stagnant on the index. We want to move forward and believe that the Rule of Law Index is an important resource that we can tap on as we develop our nation. Once again, thanks to the WJP for this resource, the Rule of Law Index. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Margaret. What both she and I didn't tell you, that she comes from a country with probably the best fish on earth. If there's anything to visit Malawi for, it will be an unforgettable experience, I can assure you. Our next panelist is somebody who happens to come from the country that I also come from, who Justice Richard Goldstone will speak to us about the judicial perspective on the rule of law. Now, in the dark, dark days of apartheid, when the rule of law was under vicious attack in South Africa, and the government at the time sought in all ways to try and manipulate the judiciary and the legal system to suit itself and its ability to stay in power, Justice Goldstone was one of those judges who remained firm, and he was one of those judges who gave hope that actually the law does matter. The law is there to serve the citizens and not those people in power. He was universally trusted. He was one of those judges who were universally trusted in South Africa. And even in the dying days of apartheid, when there were suspicions that the government was trying everything in its power to hold on to power by unleashing death squads on its opponents, and there was a judicial commission of inquiry looking into that, he was the one who was universally trusted to be the one who chairs that commission, and it's still one of the best-known commissions in South Africa. It was called the Goldstone Commission, and it looked into into paramilitary violence and so on in South Africa at that particular point in time. And it was no wonder that he became one of the founding judges of South Africa's Constitutional Court when South Africa eventually became a democracy. And that court, under the guidance of people like Justice Goldstone, went on to become a great pillar of our democracy and the rule of law in South Africa. It did not just look at mere constitutionalism. It actually put meat to the idea of constitutionalism and the rule of law, and actually extended rights to mean that it actually extends to the everyday lives of people, whether including socio-economic rights. When he when he retired from the South African Constitutional Court, Justice Goldstone went on to serve on various committees, various UN inquiries, which looked into war crimes and genocides in places like Rwanda, places like Yugoslavia and Kosovo, and also served on the inquiry into the Iraq Oil for Food program, which, as we know, had various questions over it. He is currently a visiting professor at Harvard and is co-chair of the International Bar Association. Justice Goldstone.
Thank you very much for your warm introduction, Rondi. It's always been a great pleasure and privilege to be associated in any way with the World Justice Project, and I was delighted to receive an invitation from Bill Newcomb to be with you at this launch of the World Justice Project 4th Rule of Law Index. It's a great achievement in a short period of 4 years that the Rule of Law Index has become recognized as a reliable and credible indicator of domestic respect and, unfortunately, in some countries, disrespect for the rule of law, now in 99 countries. It really plunged in at the deep end. It really is remarkable that the Rule of Law Index in 4 short years has developed as it has, and has a huge investment in 99 nations. As has been explained to us, the index is a diagnostic tool that informs constructive discussion. And that's a huge gift to the countries involved and to other countries, no doubt, who will become involved in the future. It's important to have this tool to measure compliance or non-compliance with the rule of law, to sit down with leaders and the media and civil society, and to be able to discuss the topic in the detail that one is enabled to do by the Rule of Law Index. It informs, as I've already indicated, legislators, the media, and perhaps most importantly of all, members of the public in these countries. It's also been explained, but I want to emphasize that the index is directed at outcomes rather than laws, at substance rather than form. It looks at what leaders do and not what they say. It's a concern that has become more and more apparent that there's some countries, and it's not a small number, that, for example, ratify human rights conventions with no intention of complying with them. They ratify them to get the human rights community off their back. They get onto the good list, and they're not at the receiving end of being pushed to ratify important international United Nations conventions. They ratify, and that has the advantage of moving them out of the spotlight. But if they don't intend to comply with those conventions, it really should be seen for what it is, an empty gesture, form and no substance. And it's that sort of diagnostics that is important from the Rule of Law Index. It is hardly relevant that courts are open to all if only the wealthy can access them. That I think is taken for granted, and I think it's important that the Rule of Law Index gives attention. I use this as one example of elevating substance over form. It's a huge responsibility of law firms in democracies to provide quality and quantity of pro bono representation. I think law firms in the United States can take particular pride in the importance that large and small law firms attach to pro bono, to providing pro bono defences. It's spread to other countries, to my own country in South Africa, I'm happy to say, as also is the work of public interest law firms. And it's those contributions that make the difference to where a country is situated in the Rule of Law Index. Education for democracy is obviously important and certainly cannot be overestimated. But what is even more important, I would suggest, is good leadership. If you look at the countries at the top of the list, you'll find they have consistently provided good leadership, leaders for whom the rule of law is important. And in the countries, as you go down the list, the countries at the bottom of the list almost invariably, I would suggest, have bad leaders. In some cases, I would suggest the Rule of Law Index is calculated to improve leadership. Leaders in democracies are concerned at where their standing is on the Rule of Law Index. I'm concerned as a South African that as a democracy now almost exactly 20 years old, we number 40 out of 99. I would love to see us much higher on the Rule of Law Index than we are. As an African, I'm perhaps even more concerned that at 40 we number 3, which doesn't say very much for the implementation of the rule of law on my continent. The Rule of Law Index is a wonderful illustration of the constructive use of modern technology. There's no way 20 years ago that 99 countries could be examined and dissected in the way that the World Justice Project has done in producing this 4th Rule of Law Index. Imagine over 100,000 public interviews or interviews with members of the public, almost 2,500 experts being consulted. There's no way this couldn't be done with modern technology, without the internet, and without efficient computer programs. So it's a very important illustration of harnessing modern technology for a very good purpose. I read this morning on the train coming up from Washington in the Financial Times that there are now, according to the author of an op-ed, there are now almost 100 nations that are more or less imperfect democracies. The number in 1990 was about half of that number, and that's an important advance. And I would suggest that it is to the leadership of those almost 100 maybe imperfect democracies that the Rule of Law Index should be directed. So the World Justice Project, through the Rule of Law Index, provides the world with a great service. and I'm sure I join with everybody in this audience and on the internet in congratulating the leaders of the World Justice Project on producing the fourth Rule of Law Index. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panelists for that great nutrition for the mind, and also hopefully a call to action for all of us to make sure that the rule of law is something that is adhered to by everybody on our planet. At this point, I would like to call upon... Okay, at this point, we are now going to go into the conversation stage. Questions, contributions, and the floor will be open to everybody. And Alex and Juan will come back up on stage. And excuse me? Yes, please.
This Q&A session will be presided over by another of our board members, the Honorable Justice Ellen Grassi Norfleet, former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Brazil. Justice Norfleet.
Thank you very much, Bill. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon with this audience here in City University of New York. I should add that we have with us also joining people that are all around the world and join this conversation through the internet. I'm glad to sign to you that we'll receive your questions, written questions that our staff will collect. And please do point out your name and your institutional affiliation so that we can mention it. It would be good to do that. We already have 3 questions here, and I'm not going to point out who's going to answer. You please feel free to join into the conversation and add whatever comments you would like to. First question, and I don't have the name of the person who asked this question. He says, is this data, the data in the index, is this data used by any other organizations?
Yes, the data from the previous editions has been used by other organizations producing also global indicators, for example, Transparency International, the OECD, the European Union Research Center, the World Bank as well. So just to create global indicators as well.
Another question, this time coming from Argentina. Rosario Pavesi, belonging to the chapter of Transparency International. Rosario asks us, what strategies for attacking corruption, harassing, especially in Latin America?
The World Justice Project has 3 lines of business. One is research and scholarship. The second one is the index. And the third one is engagement. Through the engagement strategy, we have interacted and built a network of thousands of individuals around the world. And corruption is one of the issues that come first in the agenda of improving reforms, because corruption makes medicines get in the hands of the doctors and not in the patients. And makes the buildings collapse, as Bill mentioned in the past, because they do not follow the protocols and the materials are weakened. How do we advance corruption? Well, the first thing is you cannot improve, you cannot measure. So measuring is the first step, but measuring is not all. We are providing data on 100 countries on corruption and other 8 dimensions of the rule of law. But then this data needs to be taken into the ground and moved through the countries. Enlightened governments, and many of them consult with us on a regular basis, try to dig into the data, understand it, and use it to advance reform. Others ignore it. So it is in the hands of everybody of us. As we said before, everybody is a stakeholder in the rule of law, from the architects to the engineers to the business community to the civil society, to bring this to the attention of the governments so that they are more accountable. One specific issue, there is about 50 countries in the world without a Freedom of Information Act. Malawi is one example in which this issue was identified a year ago in Malawi, has not passed. A draft is on Congress. We will see if next year, Margaret, and thank you for your remarks, this issue will advance. This transparency is the best disinfectant, as a prominent judge in this country mentioned earlier.
Very well. Now we have a question that I deem very, very important to you, Juan, and Alejandro also. The question says, do you see differences between how experts respond to the household polls? If so, how do you reconcile? Because all of us, we have understood that we have this large, enormous database, and we have a rigorous index. How do we reconcile the expert views with the data we collect?
In general, we have done that exercise. In general, the 2 data sources are very consistent from one each other. So we, first of all, we don't ask all the same questions to the two different sources. We ask some of them. There are some questions that are addressed only to the public, some of them that are addressed only to the expert. But in those that are common, we in general see a very high correlation. In those cases in which we see disparities, we actually check why that might be happening. In some cases, it's because we have very few experts, or the expert may have a certain bias, and we try to correct that. In some other cases, we have found, particularly in the early stages of the project, some difficulties in collecting data in some places in which people just were not as open just to address certain issues. So we try to address some of these things. But in general, they are quite consistent on the issues in which both sources are asked.
Justice Norfleet, if I may add very, very quickly, when we started this in 2008, based on our experience earlier in the World Bank and at Yale, the expectation that I personally had was that they would diverge very significantly. And the reason there is 2 sources is because it's the old story of the elephant. If you only see one side, you don't see the full picture. An expert may tell you what is going on in the civil procedure case, but an expert doesn't tell you if the citizen in the street, low-income citizen, actually has any capacity, any possibility whatsoever to ever get in front of a judge. So these 2 dimensions are important. However, now that we have collected so much data over so many years, the way in which the 2 sources of data align is remarkable. And this is a revelation for us.
Thank you. Ed Turner, an international pro bono lawyer, is asking us another question that relates to the last one. How are the contributing experts selected?
Through several procedures. So we have a large database of practitioners in each one of the countries. Out of those, some from different directories, Google searches, from different firms, and so on. We have, just depending on the country, but in general, hundreds of possible candidates for experts. All of them are actually checked to see whether they qualify for an area of expertise, and they are randomly selected and then just invited to participate. This year particular, just we are also just once the expert that answered the years before are invited as well to participate. In some cases, also through referrals from the
Kaulias, is that how we say it? And Shubha Arandia asked us a question that is, how do you see the index being used by business to respect or support the rule of law in the regions they do or want to operate in? How do you see?
Well, I think Brackett Deniston's testimony was very clear and forceful in this regard. My experience with not just his remarkable company, but others who have provided us an audience is that, for example, if you are curious about a particular developing country market, 60% of GE's revenues come from offshore. I think Microsoft's number is at least as large. It's pretty plain that growth opportunities are largely in developing market countries. The more mature market countries have been pretty well saturated, if you will. So those countries are of particular interest. You start with that proposition, and the question is, what can I expect there? Is a contract a contract? Is a court of integrity? Those kinds of basic questions are what we try to make clear with our data. And in many cases, sophisticated countries have very smart, observant people on the ground already, but those people are, after all, employees of those companies. And I think it's useful for companies management to have not just that, but an independent, impartial set of data as well to compare with what they're getting with their people on the ground. So the question is, do we want to invest there? Do we want to invest more there? Do we want to do business there? What kind of business? But it all starts with this proposition of, can we do business, can we avoid corruption, and can we do business in a way that is good for our stakeholders, and especially the folk in that country, which is the point I thought tellingly that Brackett kept coming back to. It's not just what's good for a multinational based in this country, it's what's good for that country, because I think businesses want to do business not just in lawful markets, but in happy markets where people think they have opportunity and equity. And this is the data we think helps them realize and measure the risks involved in doing business in a particular country.
Victoria Cummings from CLS Bank International asks us, do you have plans to expand the number of countries assessed? What is the reason for certain countries not being assessed?
We would love to expand the sample, but this is a very expensive exercise. So the trade-off between expansion and limited resources is the main limitation to expand. Because as someone pointed out to me when I was speaking with her, her country only has 500,000 people. However, for these 500,000 people, that is the most important country in the world. So the main criteria to expand has been population. So population, most large countries in the world are all covered. When you go to the small islands, the effort and expense of going there is very difficult to advance beyond a certain number. We are about 23% of the world's population in the 99 countries that we're covering. Would love to cover more. We invite your contributions to that goal.
How specifically has the scientific validity of the rule of law of the index being measured? Alejandro?
There are several ways. Just to assess the concept validity, we have the conceptual framework. We have done to a lot of exercises and presentations in different academic seminars in different universities and in different countries, just to assess the conceptual validity of the concepts that we're measuring. Then on top of that, the validity of the exercise, just in terms of the data collection of the survey data, we try to abide as much as possible to the statistical rigor. So something that we didn't mention, the sample in each one of the countries is probabilistic, 1,000 people in the 3 largest cities, and we check just constantly with the polling companies to evaluate that the data are actually right. Just there are many steps in the process just of evaluating the data with pilots and so on. On top of that, whenever we receive the results, we cross-check the results against qualitative and quantitative sources, just that we have gathered on each one of the different factors and sub-factors that we collect. Then we also engage in a statistical exercise, just the changes over time. We did a bootstrapping proceeding, and then on the statistical, we also have a statistical audit carried out by the European Commission Research Center.
And please read the methodology pages in the report. And then there is a methodology paper of 100 pages in the webpage, which you can access with a whole lot more detail.
All the questions are there.
Important point, excuse me.
Yeah, so something in the paper, all the questions that map into the different indicators, so what exactly we're measuring in each one of the indicators of the sub-factors, it's in that paper. So the 500 questions, the text of the 500 questions is there.
Someone in the audience who's staff of a mission to the UN, country from the Middle East, I don't have the name here, but asks the following question: absence of information on certain countries in the region. Well, I'm not sure whether this person, the mission he works with is in the Middle East. The question relates to the Middle East. Absence of information on certain countries in the region is meaningful. Could you please explain why? Why there's absence of information?
We want to grow. The 2 areas in which we want to grow the most is Sub-Saharan Africa, which has these huge holes in the map, and the Middle East, because our coverage is very limited. These 2 areas are critical for growth. And we are looking into that as we speak.
How many languages has or will the index be translated into?
I would like to point out an important point. The general population survey has been translated to 20-something languages because it is conducted in the actual language of the population, all the major languages in the population. So yes, Zulu, yes, sir. That is the validity of the data depends fundamentally on that, and it's adapted to the languages. Now, the final result, which is the index, most of the impact of it is numbers, which is an universal language. Translating the rest of the exercise and the text has not been done so far. It should be done.
Stephen, I can't understand his last name. Well, Stephen knows, is here with us in the audience, wants to know where in the index is there a consideration of government's adherence to treaty and other international obligations. For example, respect for human rights and neighboring borders.
The first version of the index, which Mark Agrast developed, for the most part with the help of academics from various universities, including Bologna and others, included, and this can be downloaded from the webpage, including Factor 5. Factor 5 back then was adherence to international law. We spent several years trying to disentangle several aspects of that. Measuring adherence to international law, what does international law mean? I mean, I spent several years of my life negotiating international trade treaties. There is very little in common between international trade law, international labor law, international criminal law, humanitarian law. So it's an entire new index. So the development of that has been so complicated that our measurement today has not been able to capture that dimension. It is not because it is not fundamentally important. It is because it's an entire, complete new exercise. However, having said this, much of the internal application in practice of the internal legislation maps very closely with the international adherence to international standards. Therefore, when we measure freedom of speech in practice in a country, Colombia, this freedom of speech also speaks to the Universal Declaration, speaks to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, speak to the international treaties. So part of international law is already measured in practice through measuring internal application of internal legislation. Big areas are left out, and that is a major difficulty, which I think I explained why it is not there.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure whether we can answer this question, since up to now we all realized that the index is a good tool, a tool for government reformers, a tool for the legislators, for a tool for the citizen in the street. But the question is, how do you go about implementing the rule of law in post-conflict countries? Bill, that question is for you.
Thank you. Well, I think the data provided by the index is of exceptional value in a post-conflict nation state, because there is so much about its circumstances that are fresh and, in some sense, a bit of a clean slate. There is a powerful book by Ashraf Ghani and Claire Lockhart on failed states. There is increasing literature from the Academy generally on the subject of recovering states, and we'd like to think that our data is of particular value to those states that have the will to build themselves towards a rule of law community coming out of conflict.
In any case, Bill, I think you will agree with me, we don't have a rule that fits all. We give the instruments, we give the tools for people down there in the ground to do whatever they think it's useful for the country.
Yes, whereas we are passionate about the foundational importance of the rule of law for communities of opportunity and equity, we try to be very careful to be scrupulous in our role as honest brokers of information. That is what we do. We create reliable, accurate, current data, which people can use and organizations can use in lots of different ways. And the point of the data is to show where you are on a spectrum of adherence to the rule of law, absolutely and relatively. But we are not advocates. When we go to a country like as we have in Tunisia and in Malawi, we think of ourselves as brokers of information, to some extent as organizers of workshops for those people in those countries to use the data to petition their governments, to move their governments towards more rule of law. But after that, we're just a resource. We may go to a meeting with a high government official, but not as an advocate. The advocacy has to come from the people on the ground, which comes back to our mission, which is homegrown culture of the rule of law based on reliable data.
Well, this question, no doubt, has something to do with your background, Juan. Does IMF or the World Bank influence, pressure, or encourage change in rule of law?
Well, clearly the question needs to be answered by the World Bank as I left the organization 10, 12 years ago. But, however, no, I think I can. Yeah.
I cannot speak up the moment.
Well, anyway, we all know that these organizations, both the IMF and the World Bank, a time ago, they realized that the rule of law was really important for development. Yeah. We couldn't have development without this structure of institutions and a legal structure. So this made a lot of change in policies in the bank.
And if I may, just perhaps a grace note, you heard Jenny Martinez from Stanford Law School talk about meaning and measurement, and other folks have talked about measurement, but it's worth, I think, pausing for a moment and recognizing the essential importance of some shared understanding of the meaning of the rule of law. It is such a capacious concept, and it means so many different things to so many different people. And one of the things we've tried very hard to do was to get ourselves above the fray and to be agnostic about forms of government and even forms of macroeconomic systems, and to come up with these universal principles. And we are gratified at the number of individuals and experts and organizations who have found merit in that definition of the concept of the rule of law, because unless you have a shared understanding of it within some reasonable margins, it's very hard to measure it and it's very hard to improve it.
Well, we come to our last question of the day, and still corruption is one of the big worries around the world. The question is, if the index references corruption, that indicates that what indicates
what indicator does the WJP
what indicator does the WJP use to make that statement as objectively as possible? I think that would be the question means in the questionnaire that's
right.
That's used.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm trying to understand this question. So the first thing to say is that we collect information ourselves. So this is not based on third-party sources or anything like that. So it's just collected from the household surveys and so on, and the expert surveys. Now, having said that, just obviously there are challenges in how to phrase the questions and how to try to measure also the different dimensions of corruption. Corruption is one of the most difficult things to measure. We know that. We try to capture that just through first bribery, through victimization questions on bribery to the people. So whether they had paid a bribe, whether they had just a bribe to the police or the public health sector and so on. And there are techniques actually just to make it less sensitive. On top of that, obviously there are perception questions just to try to address embezzlement, which is very difficult, just to the people, to experts. The corruption battery has about 50 different questions. Okay. There you go. Okay. So that addresses many of these different dimensions of corruption to try to get as best as possible the best picture. Probably on the website, I mean, unfortunately, the technology didn't help, but one of the things that it's on the website is just information about many of the questions that we ask in the household surveys and the responses that people have given to specific questions in each one of the countries is available now on the website. Dan, who worked on the website, was working very late yesterday just to put it up there. So there are a lot of questions that we have asked, either to the people or to the experts, and the scores are there for you to play with.
Well, thank you, Juan. Thank you, Alejandro and Bill. This was the last question, and now I turn to Bill for the...
Thank you, Justice Norfleet, and thanks again to each and every one of you for attending, whether physically or virtually. We're delighted to have this opportunity to explain what we're doing and to introduce the fourth version of our index and to get your criticisms and your comments, and please continue to give us the benefit of your thinking in order that we can continue to make this better. As I said at the outset, it is something of an infinite horizon. There will never be, in my lifetime, a perfect rule of law world, but steps in that direction are important. And we're only likely to make progress if we have the data, we have a meaning, we have a measurement, and we can go from there. And yes, we would like to measure more countries. We would like to go into the countryside in more countries. We'd like to have more data about compliance with multilateral treaties and other international laws. Those are all opportunities for us. And if we can continue to do what we do well and continue to earn the sort of support, financial and otherwise, from third parties, we hope that we can do that. In the meantime, we invite you to wallow in the data and to make a constructive use of it in whatever your work discipline might be, whether it be government or private or civil society. And again, thank you for your support, thank you for your criticism, and Godspeed to all of you.